So that critical thinking of kind of figuring out what's the problem you're trying to solve and working back from that and bringing the tech in to deliver that problem. So the tech or the talent. So you want to think about the combination between tech and touch and tech and talent.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. Hello, Rebel HR community. Welcome back for our podcast this week. Really excited for this conversation. This is going to be super fun, and I think it might be some things that we have not discussed much on this podcast. So really excited to dig into this. With us today, we have Marcus Sawyerr. Marcus is the founder and CEO at EQ Community. He spent the last 15 years climbing from the front line to executive of a Fortune 500 company focused on online recruitment and digital transformation, along with notable Microsoft Services executive board position. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things, but first I want to start off by welcoming you to the show. Thanks, Marcus, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Carl. Appreciate it.
Really excited for the conversation today. And you know, I always regret not hitting record right when I meet someone on this podcast, because we were already just starting to dig into some really exciting topics. Before we get there, though, you have had a really interesting career. You have relocated and lived in different countries. I'd like to understand a little bit about what brought you where you are today in your career.
Sure. I'll give you the mid version, right? So I'll spare your listeners for the long version. But I basically, like I suppose most people, whether it's recruiting or HR, kind of fell into that space. I actually had a sports background. So in London, I was playing professional sports and I had a scholarship, decided to get a job in a gym because I thought that I could continue basically learning my craft of sports and get a job in the gym, but they didn't have any typical gym jobs. So then I got into sales. And I don't know if anybody knows or have ever worked in the gym, but going out in the street and trying to get people into the gym in the early 2000s when no one was interested in doing that, it's kind of a little bit of a graft. So you don't make a ton of money. And I saw this sales job advertised, ironically, online for the first time. And it was a company called careerbuilder.com. And I applied for it. I was underqualified, but they needed some cold callers. So I came in and got the job and started cold calling. And I eventually stayed there for a total of 10 years and got promoted every year and became director for Europe for the staffing and recruiting division, which means I was working with staff and recruiting companies, helping them get access to online. So we were disrupting the newspapers at the time because everyone was doing their ads in newspapers. So we kind of moved into that world. And then after that, one of my clients, which happened to be a large Fortune 500 company, the Adecco Group, had said that they're doing a digital transformation. I said, oh, fantastic. Let's see how we can help you. And he was like, no, I think you could do it. I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, we've got 30,000 employees. We need a global head of digital innovation. And the chief sales officer for the whole group said, I think you can do it. I was like, really? He's like, yeah. I said, okay. So I went through a process. I thought, you know what, this process is pretty long because I met 10 different people, but I thought at least I'm going to get different sales leads and get deeper into the org. So it was like a 9-month process. And I got the job as being global head of digital innovation for the largest staffing company in the world. And I'd done that for 5 years, traveled the world, bought, built, and invested in HR tech companies and scanned the market. And yeah, that was kind of my start of the journey. And then decided once I moved out to the US to found and set up my own business focused on diversity and inclusion. So digital and diversity has been my background.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And I remember those career builder days. At one point, that was kind of the only game in town. So you were building that right when that was coming into being. So that's cool.
Yeah, we've got quite a strong alumni. Everyone jokes around about the Career Builder Mafia because everybody who used to work for Career Builder in HR is somewhere. And we had these cool Super Bowl ads at the time. before like Bored Ape Yacht Club, we had the apes on the Super Bowl ads. Everybody knew who Career Builder was. And yeah, it was pretty cool. It was a good company to work for, good culture, a lot of fun.
That's cool. Very cool. So I want to dive right into it. I think, and you already mentioned this, there's really two areas that we wanted to focus on today, and the D&D, as you described it, the diversity and digital. So why don't we start with, first of all, let's start with diversity. As you think about the organizations that you've supported, your customers, your clients, what is your perspective on companies' approaches to diversity in the past, and where our approach needs to be going forward?
Absolutely. So it's a huge topic. It's a topic that touches many people in different ways, dependent on, I suppose, where you're coming from, so your background, and also maybe where you live. And that means that it needs to be tackled with nuance. My experience after seeing multiple organizations, companies, and the way that they operate has been that really diversity acts as a superpower when you harness it. And with a sports background, great sports teams get that, right? So if you're playing not everybody can play in the same position on a sports team. Not everyone can play point guard. You need different types of skills. And inside an organization, it's been proven that if you can get that team together, and let's say we're all sitting around a boardroom table, right? We're trying to identify this object that's in the middle of this table. So we're looking at this object, but it's got multiple sides. And the only way we can understand what the object is or how it's going to work is by getting everybody's perspective. So the diversity of thought, as well as race, gender, color, ethnicity, is super important. But what that brings is you come from a different perspective. And when you harness that, it gives you superpowers. But the challenge is bringing all of those diverse mentalities into one room and getting stuff done, right? And that comes down to the culture of the organization.
Yeah, so I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, because I think everybody who's listening to this is probably shaking their head up and down. Yeah, it can be a superpower. And I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of organizations that are doing a great job kind of showcasing diversity within their organization. But I think many of us still struggle with, how do we actually address that challenge of bringing that diversity into an organization, and then allowing that superpower to actually shine, right? Many times it's kind of a compliance initiative, or it's a marketing initiative, but it
Right.
doesn't necessarily trickle into, truly trickle into our culture without some really intentional actions. So as you look at that and you think about the work that you do at EQ Community, how do you address that? How do you really kind of build that culture to truly harness that superpower?
Yeah, so we started EQ Community based on the fact that, as I mentioned, I kind of got to a point where I was at the top of organizations. I looked around, I saw less and less people that looked like me, or even had any perspective like me, which is fine. But when you see nobody at all, you start to question that. And I was in a position where I had the opportunity to work with some private equity firms and venture capital firms. And what they realized is that if they're fast growing companies that they are now seeding, investing, and trying to scale, do not have access to diverse talent, it's going to be super challenging for them to operate in a global market. So that's like the macro level. So we built out these diversity pledges. So let's get a bit more practical, right? What do you actually do? There's one thing of having a pledge. Then you have somebody that's going to support that pledge. So this is what companies do. They'll write out something, like you said, marketing material. Then they maybe hire somebody, and they'll put somebody on top of that. And they'll do one or two things. They'll isolate that person, give them no budget, so they can't do anything. Or it would have come top down and bottom up, and they'll start driving things forward. One of the best examples of companies that have been super diverse for a long period of time, and they've got leaders at every single level. And every time I've interacted with them, and they're not a client of ours or anything, it's just a company I've interacted with and seen, is American Express. They've got diverse talent at every single level. So the challenge for HR, in my opinion, is you're almost trying to keep the ship moving yourself day to day, and you're trying to make sure that the organization is well-oiled, well-drilled. And I'm saying that my sister's in HR as well, right? But then you've got to think longer term. And then you're trying to change a culture completely. Where does that culture come from? A lot of the time it comes from the top. And we'll say that it's bottom up, but it comes from the top. And then you've got it comes from the bottom. And then in the middle is where the bottlenecks are. So if you've got people that want to do things around DE&I inside your organization, harness that. And it's the same for digital, right? People want to do innovation, and then it gets messy. You get shadow IT, you get all of these different things that people are working on, and you can't control it. But I think giving people a framework to work in and crowdsourcing those ideas inside of your organization and bringing people along the journey is really a key way to drive it. And you've got to see it like as a priority. Again, it's not a box ticking exercise. Like genuinely, if you look at teams, you do not have people playing in the same positions. Number one, you do not have people from the exact same backgrounds. You're just trying to win. So in HR, are you trying to win or are you trying to keep your job? There's two different things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that I really like how you put that. Are you trying to win or are you trying to keep your job? And I can honestly say that sometimes when you see people at organizations, that's a valid question, right? I think it's, and I so often I think about it's the context of, it's like the people that are trying to win are trying to drive positive change, culture change, do some of the things you mentioned, top down and bottom up, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then you've got people that are just trying not to get sued.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're afraid of lawsuits. Right. And those are the people they're just trying to keep their job. Right. They don't want the CEO calling them and saying, hey, why did we get this lawsuit notice or something along those lines?
Yeah. And you know what, Carl, as well, like there's a role for that in teams, right? You need defenders, you need defense. But if that's your culture, don't expect to innovate. And I would also argue that a lot of those companies that are thinking in that way are probably not innovating from a digital standpoint. That's why I couple digital and diversity. Are you thinking about how you can be better and how you can perform, irrespective of just the status quo? And then, but you've got to weigh up the risk. It's like, well, if I do that, then what? Right? And how bold do you want to be? And what I tell you is longer term, it will serve you much better. Short term, you're going to have some challenges, right? Because you're going to feel like you're driving an uphill battle. But you'll find rebels that will also want to do this and also want to drive things forward, right? And that's what I suppose this is about.
Hey, thanks for working rebels in. That was nice, nicely done. I can tell. I can tell you've been in sales.
I got a text message from you earlier, so I made sure I worked with it.
just so everybody knows, we didn't plan that, but Marcus is clearly he is very suave with the placement there. But all kidding aside, I think that's a really powerful connection, and I kind of feel like it's kind of the same equation, right? It's like if you're open to diversity, you're probably a change agent. You probably are looking to get better. And if your organization is supportive of diversity from the top down, I guarantee you that your senior leadership team is probably aligned with that thinking as well. And so often I'll find, like when I'm recruiting a candidate, candidates want that too. It's pretty powerful. Their experience and in just getting hired, and how digitally forward thinking that experience was for them, that matters.
Absolutely.
I've had candidates who are like, yeah, I don't, your website's a mess. I don't know if I want to work at a company where your website sucks so bad. I mean, it happens.
I heard that just yesterday, actually, again. And we'd had to say, no, 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 don't worry about that. The company is actually amazing, but
Yeah.
it's your shop window. And I think that's what we forget. So if we all had a store or a shop and we're selling items, we're not our shop window is not going to look a mess, right? Because we're out on the front line, we're going to take pride in it. We're going to sweep outside. We're going to make sure that it looks good and it feels good because we want to entice people into it. And that's what luxury brands do. And you do see this. And so we're talking about being a bit more offensive. And so how can HR be innovative and offensive when typically the mindset of HR is to protect and be defensive? And maybe that's in the composition of your team within HR. Maybe you are the one that's defensive, but you hire someone offensive and you work together in tandem in your team. And I've started to see that work as well because it opens up your mind and then you start to change things and you can support them and how to operate in that environment. Because, like the reality of it is people do want to keep their jobs. So let's just say that's a baseline, right? But then the next level is how do you then progress to the next level? Because I always feel like if you're not growing, you're dying.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're not growing, you're going to only keep your job for a certain period of time until somebody else comes up behind you if you haven't moved things forward. So thinking about like the next steps are always important, even if you can't execute them on them right now, but really being deliberate about how you drive the next steps forward outside of day to day, I think is super interesting. You've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, as they say.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree 100%. And the world I came up with in HR, I've worked for those organizations where HR was on the offense, and then I've worked for those organizations where HR was on the defense. Defending the goal line, and that's it. And I definitely I tend to lean more on the offensive side of the coin for sure. I want to dive into that word digital a little bit because I think so often you see it in the HR tech space where it's like there's this tool and it's a piece of tech software. It looks really cool. It gives you a flashy maybe you get a flashy dashboard, but it's really something that still requires HR to take some level of action, right? Like just getting a tool doesn't necessarily make you better or make you good in the digital space. And digital means so much, right? So as you look at digital in the context of human resources, what are some of the things that you're seeing where digital is actually really enabling the business change that needs to occur?
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Yeah. So the way I think about digital and again, diversity, but I'll go back to digital is you've got organizations that are digital by default and you have organizations that are diverse by default. And organizations that are digital by default are generally tech companies because their business revolves around them having a solution where they can serve their customers through technology, and whether that's through online. And we talked earlier, Carl, right? You're manufacturing. So there'll be some, I imagine, in that process of whether we call it digital or not, but there's been a lot of automation that's taken place in manufacturing over the years, right? To get more effective and more efficient. And manufacturing is actually the cornerstone, I think, for a lot of automation and digital, generally speaking. And why you decide to change your processes of manufacturing is probably because you can be more effective in delivering that good at a faster pace, at a higher quality. And so how do you think about that with inside HR? I always like to think through what I call high frequency, high volume, highly repetitive tasks. So an example of that may be, and it depends on how you want to move the needle. So let's think about internally first. But an example of that might be you might get these canned questions that happen all the time from multiple employees, and you'll need a place to direct them in order to do that. So that could be a website, it could be a chatbot, it could be something where you've taken that knowledge that you already have and put it in a place so people can access it on demand. That will save you time internally if you do that. Externally, I think the digital transformation piece for HR, which is really interesting, is thinking about the talent. So when hiring managers come to you and they may want to hire somebody, let's just talk about, let's say in the metaverse. And when I say metaverse, let's say blockchain engineers. I know there are big financial institutions right now that are hiring blockchain engineers. I know for a fact that there are HR professionals that have no idea what the skill set of those blockchain engineers are because they haven't been up on it, which is fine. And probably even the hiring managers have read an article, they've seen something, and then the CEO said, right, we need to do this metaverse thing, digital transformation. I want somebody to go deep in it. You've got a maverick innovation person in that unit, understands it deeply, but they haven't brought everybody along the journey. So I think with digital, taking a real interest in how those innovators are buddying up with them is really important. Like, can you spend what if you've got somebody as innovation in your organization, just have a weekly one-to-one with them because they'll be interested to tell you all the stuff that they're learning. And then you'll be the second point person on that and you'll know how to drive things forward. So talent is absolutely key, and understanding the type of talent you're going to bring in an organization. And then there's automation internally that you may be able to drive.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I think, my approach has always been, listen, tech is great, right? I love automating a process and then never having to think about it again. And that frees up your mind to think about the bigger problems, like how do I address middle management's approach to diversity, because that's where we're falling short, or how do I improve this process so that it's more effective for an onboarding experience, and so on and so forth. And so externally, I think this is getting pretty fascinating. First of all, you used a great example of a position that hasn't existed 10 years earlier. Blockchain engineer. Well, what is that? Is that somebody doing Legos? Like
Right.
10 years ago, that didn't exist, right? So it's like, that's a great example of like HR is being asked to go find these people.
And 10 years ago, it didn't exist. And then they want somebody with 10 years experience, the hiring manager, right?
No, 15 preferably.
15, yeah, 15. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So figure that out. Like, we need 5 and 15 years experience. So I think part of that and keeping up on it is being able to manage those expectations as well, right?
Yeah.
Internally, and showing that and it's work. But if you take an interest in tech, or you're interested in efficiency, and maybe it's not tech, but thinking about efficiency. So I was thinking as we were just talking, if you couple digital transformation with critical thinking, you put yourself in a much better position to really understand that what is going to have a significant impact versus what is just a point solution, because we're talking about tools. And I agree, so many tools out there. And I remember when I first started doing innovation within the Deco group, I'd see all these companies and I'm like, wow, this one's amazing, this one's amazing, this one's amazing. Now I'm fairly optimistic. So you kind of get, then you get hardened to it. It's like, I've just seen 100 of these same types of tools that say they can do the same service, and it's not necessarily going to move the needle. So that critical thinking of kind of figuring out what's the problem you're trying to solve and working back from that and bringing the tech in to deliver that problem. So the tech or the talent. So you want to think about the combination between tech and touch and tech and talent.
I love that. And I think about it, I think about it in the context of, like you said, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Well, one of the biggest problems that all of us in HR are trying to solve right now is making sure we have enough time and making sure we can focus on the right things, right? And so in that context, if that's the problem you're trying to solve, why wouldn't you go out and find something that can save you 2 hours a week in administrative repetitive tasks that could be, maybe you need to digitize your training program so that you just click one button and then somebody's enrolled in all the trainings they need to be enrolled in, instead of sitting there and clicking through all the individual trainings. Like, that legit happens, right? Like, oh, here's my
Yeah,
checklist of all the trainings I got to enroll people in. Like, maybe you go spend $1,000 for a software engineer to build a piece of software that just does it for you, right?
yeah. No, absolutely. And I was just going to agree with you. And I think you actually asked the question in that was, why is it not done? But it's time, right? It's
Yeah,
time, it's headspace. And then you think through, it's like, well, is it going to be worth it? And you're like, oh no, I need to get this report done by tomorrow anyway, so I'm just going to do it
exactly.
myself. So maybe you just have, like, some more practically, you've got 1 or 2 projects. You sit down and say, well, these are the projects that are taking the longest time. And even working with the innovation team, if you've got someone who's like, hey, these things are taking me forever, do you think you could help me, like, digitalize these pieces? Because that would be super useful.
Yep.
And then you work in tandem, and there's an example, and they get those projects done as well. And they've probably got budget in order to do that, and trying to figure out new ways to make the organization drive forward. But I think partnering with the innovation teams is key.
Absolutely.
HR.
Absolutely. One of my best friends at work is on the IT team, and she runs our intranet. And you know how many cool things you can do with a workflow and an idea? Like, we've digitized every last thing that we can in the onboarding process, so that all a hiring manager has to do now is enter in specific pieces of information, and then all of that information just flows to the people that need to know it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. It's really not that complicated. And I was sitting here hitting my head against the wall trying to figure out this problem. Like, I don't have time to do this. This is too time consuming, blah, blah, blah. Ended up striking up a conversation with this person, and they're like, oh, we can do that.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of a workflow? Yeah. And it's like, just asking those questions and having those connections, it's so critical. And now my team is like, is much more effective because this stuff just happens. So in that vein, I want to talk about a couple things that I think some of our listeners might be familiar with, some of our listeners might not be familiar with. And I think there's like so many headlines out there. I want to kind of dive into the kind of the digital landscape of the future. So, there's a lot of terms out there as we think about blockchain, Web3, Metaverse, augmented reality, virtual reality. I think there's a lot of stuff that's like just sounds cool, but it's hard for many of us to get our head wrapped around. Okay, what's the actual application here? So if we can take a step back and like just kind of walk us through what some of these tools are. And I would say, like, I just threw those terms out there. So you tell me what terms we need to know.
Sure.
What should we be aware of? What's on the landscape? And how do you see that really impacting the world of HR and people leadership?
What is your favorite brand, Kyle? Tell me 2 or 3 of your favorite brands.
My favorite brands. I like, geez, I'm really not a brand guy. Okay. I drive a Toyota.
Okay.
I have Hoka 1-1 running shoes and I don't know, shirts. I wear a Hanes undershirt every day. How about that?
Okay. And so what I'm getting from that is, like, functionality is important to you, right?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah. The Toyota is reliable, the running shoe, the sturdy, and the Hanes feels soft and smooth, right?
You got it. You got me pegged.
All right, cool, got it. And so there's the functional side, and then there are people that buy designer clothes, they buy certain cars, they buy like certain things, and a lot of it is like based on the brand, and the brand holds something to it. I think what we're seeing in the world of the metaverse, let's say, and digital let's say, digital goods, for instance, because there's many areas, is that you're seeing that brands are now leveraging pieces of real estate, if you want to call them, digital real estate, information, online at scale to really differentiate themselves and have people part of a club or a community based on being associated with that club. And I'm talking a little bit about NFTs, if anybody's like people are familiar with those. And a lot of people buy these NFTs to be part of a community or part of an online club. And the difference with being part of that club, and maybe there's another brand, maybe some people are part of country clubs, and there are certain things they go there to connect with people.
Mm.
And so what you're starting to see with these NFTs is they're really creating these digital clubs that people can be part of. So how does that translate into HR and the world of work? You're starting to see that with employer brand and employer engagement. Nike recently bought a company that is focused on creating these digital sneakers. And I was looking the other day, and the sneakers they're like $9,000 digital. You don't get given them, so there's no functionality, Carl. So you're not going to be able to run with them.
Yeah, that doesn't speak to me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But the fact that we're talking about it on the podcast right now, they've got an extra lift in their brand, right? And there's more and more podcasts or conversations that are happening because it's cool and it's innovative. And like you said around the website, you're starting to see that with digital, you're starting to see that with digital goods. People have this affiliation and association with cool brands. So you're seeing a lot in fashion. You're seeing a lot also the other, and then there's a more functional aspect of it is in music. And so any item where there can be a royalty, a smart contract can be leveraged to ensure that, hey, that resale value, if you create a good, let's say it's a piece of music or a piece of art or even like a physical good, if that gets sold again, you can automatically bake a royalty into that smart contract. So historically in the music industry, people have not, the record labels have taken all the royalties, but now that individual can then give their fans the opportunity to buy and purchase, and then their number one fans can get wealthy off the fact that they supported this artist. So you're starting to see the way that brand is the big kernel, and the way that compensation, money is changing hands for creations of work is really what's driving it. And this is all happening in a decentralized way. So there's not one place or one person that is responsible for this. It's kind of it's like crowdsource on steroids.
Mm. No, I think it's really fascinating to talk about. It's still a little bit to kind of grasp, but I do think, I mean, as I think about like the world that we work in, like all the administration that we do, you know, how do we protect employee privacy? Who's drafting the contract for this employee that's working in this region? You know, how does someone actually want to get paid? You know, what form of currency? Are we going full Bitcoin payment? You know, whatever it is. Like, there's just so many different areas that I feel like this could touch us. But I think the one that's probably the most interesting and fascinating to me right now is that it's the community piece, right? It's kind of that feeling of being a part of something that's bigger than you. And really, that's what we're talking about when we talk about building a culture and building a brand and building a work environment that people want to be in. And you know, do you see that as an opportunity for kind of future thinking companies like Nike to say, okay, you know, here we've got these cool NFTs. Now here, use this to build a club of people with the same or similar type of NFT, or here's an employee resource group driven by this. I mean, am I on the right track there? Am I understanding this theory?
Yeah, I think community is a huge kernel. So hence the reason we have EQ community, and we started with the community first because we believe that you can get more done with a group of people that have common interests. And what you see with a lot of these brands, like big brands, is they have this community, Nike Running Club, and all these types of organizations. But it's hard to cultivate and bring people around it. So they're using the metaverse, and we started exploring with that with ERGs and kind of different platforms or ways to bring people together to reward folks. So we actually dropped a couple of NFTs recently to reward people in our community for referring folks into the community or attending events. So now you've got this digital wallet, and that digital wallet is public, and people can see the events that you've attended to. There may be some value in that in the future, and you can use it. It's like sports cards. People used to collect them at school, and you're trading and swapping and changing these. And then in the future, those collector's cards become valuable. But it's a digital record, and nobody can nobody can dispute whether you had that sports card or not, because in your digital wallet there's a record there that's forever, and that brings you to become part of a community. And we're tribal by nature, right? So we all want to be part of something. We all want to feel like we're doing something that's important. We want to feel like we're doing something special. And it gives you a way in order to validate and verify that. And back to your point around culture and being part of an organization, companies are using that to strengthen their employee brand. This is a cool company to work for because you're part of something special. And I'll give you a practical manufacturing example. There's a sportswear company recently that done this same. They basically created this sneaker, and they had decided to crowdsource all of the ideas around the sneaker to develop sneakers. So then it was a combination of like thousands of people developing this sneaker. They've done that all through the blockchain. So everybody had their input on this. So guess what? When it arrives at your house, you feel like it's like part of you. And so that brings that association. And then I see, like, did you get the new sneaker that like was great? And you're like, no, I missed it. Oh man, well next time. and it's kind of that. It's a little bit of that bit of camaraderie, a bit of culture, and bringing that all together. And again, it's these common interests that you can bring people into from different backgrounds as well. And we do that inside EQ. We've got a crypto and NFT group. And so people are working completely different jobs, different levels. You've got software engineers there, you've got senior executives there, but they have this interest, so they then start to talk about this, and it brings people together as well. So I think you're going to see a lot of that around building brand, and especially employer brand as well.
Absolutely. So cool. You're saying that, I was thinking, here's one practical example of where an NFT would make perfect sense, and that would be training.
Yeah.
Every time you train someone, they get an NFT, they get a digital badge, and then that goes into your LMS. But then, oh, by the way, that's non-fungible, so they can take that with them anywhere they go, and you could validate that. And technically, that could be something that becomes a future resume for something,
100%,
right?
100%.
It's like there's so many different applications for something like that. That's fascinating.
We started looking at this in 2016, actually. So I was on a board at Microsoft Services for a piece, and they had a framework called the Cocoa framework, where blockchain was being built, and we started exploring that around smart contracts. The challenge was, it's like the, it's sort of like the plugs, right? The Apple plugs. Every time you go and plug something or buy a new Apple device, they've got a different plug socket or something to put something into.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to get on the same hymn sheet on like what are going to be those tokens that you collect from a training standpoint for them to be validated in the external world. And so thinking about those tokens and what they are, and if people all agree, you don't then have to then vet and verify the skills of those folks because they're already there. So I see that absolutely happening, but then I think it's a people challenge of people agreeing in order to do that, because everybody wants to be the one that delivers that type of token as well. So
Absolutely.
Some standards are going to be important.
Yeah, if you could just help me figure out if it's Cardano or Polkadot or Solana or some new, that'd be great. But it's been fun. It's been fascinating. I mean, this world is it's kind of foreign. It's almost like learning a foreign language for me. But it's just really interesting to think about. The things we're talking about today. I'm sure in 10 years somebody's gonna be like, they didn't even see this coming, and they didn't know what they were talking about. But I just feel like this is just another example of kind of that disruption that it's going to change the way that you work. That's just the way it is. And you got to be ready to adapt to it, right?
Absolutely. If you stay curious, you got to collect the dots before you can connect the dots. So
I love
makes
that.
it easy.
I love that. All right. Well, we are quickly coming to the end of our time together, and I'm fascinated to hear your responses. So we're going to shift into the Rebel HR Flash Round. So question number 1, where does HR need to rebel?
HR needs to rebel more with hiring managers that don't see diversity as a superpower and really push those boundaries.
Love it. I agree. I think that's where the rubber meets the road. That's also where it's not just about hiring, right? That's the employee experience. That employee journey gets much improved when you have managers that understand the importance. Question number 2, who should we be listening to?
I believe that just from a standpoint of getting information from multiple sources and then passing your own judgment is the way to make decisions. So I don't think you should leave anybody out of the conversation. I think you should be listening to the front line. You should be listening to the senior executives. And then if you're in the middle within HR, you should be really curating that information and then coming up with a conclusion that is sound and reasonable. So I think information can come from all angles.
Got it. Listen to the community, right? All
Absolutely.
right. Last question. How can our listeners connect with you?
Easy to connect with me. It's my name, Marcus Sawyerr, with 2 R's on LinkedIn, the same on Twitter as well, even though I'm not super active on there. But if you're interested in learning more about DE&I and that's something you want to drive, eq.community. And yeah, that's a way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. We'll have all that information in the show notes. Check it out. There's also, I'll put a plug in there. Marcus has some really great content out there. And check out his NFTs. It's on the LinkedIn. They look pretty cool. So really appreciate the time, Marcus. Some really great stuff, kind of stretching our minds a little bit around what HR can be and how we can innovate in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Carl. Really appreciate it.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.